a really great learning opportunity for everyone. All right, Mike, take it away.
Thank you so much. You already botched my intro by saying that I am nice. Yeah, I appreciate you. I love that like. And now a man who needs no introduction. Couple quick housekeeping things before I dive in. Number one is I have two small humans in my house. One of them is 7 months old, and one of them is a kindergartner that has the day off. There's probably like a 30% chance that I'm going to be interacting with one of them over the next 2 hours. So, depending on how you feel about that, either you're welcome, you get to see some kids, or I'm sorry, my children are interrupting and ruining everything. Number two is I'm going to throw out a couple of ideas that are pretty much me saying that everything we've been taught is completely wrong. If any of you are like me, you brainstorm and learn by arguing with others. So I want all of you to feel very encouraged at any point to go off of mute, to ask me questions, to challenge me on things, to just brainstorm. As anything pops in your brain, you're like, wait, I have a question. I want you to feel like doubly, triply, quadruply encouraged to jump in the chat, ask me questions, whatever it is that's best for you. Last, at some point, I'll be telling you about this workshop that I run if any of you are interested, probably towards the end. So if you go through this and you're like, God, this guy is so cool, nobody will think that, but like, this guy is so cool that I want to buy something from him. I'll tell you more about that later. So without further ado, by show of emoji or jumping in the chat or going off of mute and yelling at me, can you all see my screen okay? Excellent. And can we answer my question? Who here has ever built a deck? Y'all are like, Mike, this is really where you're starting right now. This is pretty basic. Who here's gotten feedback on that deck? From a mentor, an advisor, an Uber driver that you're pitching, a VC, just somebody with an opinion. Out of curiosity, did you make the changes that were given to you? Did you go through the deck and revise everything? Probably. Like, that makes sense. If somebody gives you a bunch of good, insightful ideas. But did the feedback ever go away? Was there ever a point after you had made those changes to your deck that that mentor or Uber driver or VC was like, you know what? This deck is perfect. I actually have complete and utter clarity on everything that you do. It is all clear, and I actually have no critiques for you. I am ready to have that conversation and be very excited about the next steps. Has anybody ever hit that moment? Yeah, right. And you're like, well, everybody always has some kind of an opinion. And I'm curious, this is like the really scary question that I ask. Have any of you ever made more than 10 rounds of revisions to your deck? 20? I had somebody go, I won't make you suffer through this. I teach this to both venture fund managers and to startups. And I had a fund manager who was raising for their own fund a week ago that told me that he had made 130 revisions to his deck. In case you're wondering, the deck was terrible. So I have this crazy controversial opinion that what our investors and mentors and advisors and friends and frenemies tell us they're looking for in a deck is wildly different than the things that actually drive them to move forward with you. Our investors are constantly saying things like, I need a really big market. I need a strong competitive advantage. I need a great team. And you're like, cool. What does that mean? Could you maybe be a little bit more specific about how that fits in what you're looking for? And they're like, I kind of know it when I see it, but I can't get more specific than that. And very often they don't actually understand what your company does after reading your deck. And they ask you these questions like, what's your go to market strategy and what's your business model to further ascertain in their own minds, what do you do? And we're just adding more of that extra information that somehow makes the deck a little bit less clear. But on the other end, mentors, bless our hearts, we have a tendency of giving you feedback that's more based off of the idiosyncrasies of how we would tell your stories, which is really terrifying for two specific reasons. One of them is that your mentor is not your investor, nor are they your customer. So the things that are driving them to move forward might be different than the things that would motivate an investor. The other part of this that makes mentor advice sometimes so scary is they're giving you advice based off their lived experiences, is great and it's insightful and it's helpful, but also their lived experiences are very different than somebody else's. So this new narrative that you put together might hit really well with 1/3 of your audience and get lost with another 2/3. But what's inevitably happening with most of us when we build our decks is we're filling out this template, we're getting feedback from our mentors and advisors and making changes, we're getting all of these questions from our VCs and making changes, and we blink, and then all of a sudden our deck has turned into Frankenstein's monster and is ironically way worse than it was when you just started with version 1. Insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly and hoping for a different outcome. The process that we use to build our decks is insane. We fill out a template, we get N plus one rounds of revisions and pieces of feedback from people. Our deck gets worse, and we keep hoping that it's going to get better. It is time for us to introduce a new approach. And that's what I'll be walking us through today. Before I do that, who am I and why am I qualified to be here? Hi, I'm Mike. By way of background, I've run a tech incubator. I've built and fixed startup ecosystems around the world for the World Bank. I've advised government entities. I fundraised for and launched a $50 million venture fund, and have been a general hanger abouter of a variety of different accelerator incubators, startup type programs. Um, Before I became a father, I was also a collector of weird and eccentric hobbies. So if any of you ever like put a squirrel suit on in your free time and jump off of a cliff, I really want to hear about it. I hit this point a couple of years ago where I'd met with literally thousands of brilliant entrepreneurs who had successful companies who told the absolute worst fucking stories, to the point where you would read a deck and be like, I understand less about what you do after having read this than I did before I walked in. And I had a bit of an observation that when our decks don't work, raising is a lot harder. You're like, Mike, that's not really much of an observation. Bear with me. Raising is harder. We have less conversations. The first call is miserable. And fundamentally, fundraising takes way too long. But I also found another layer of this, that those of us that have bad decks, there's also a correlation with an elevator pitch that might sound more like a TED talk, but one of those rambling TED talks that really has no point. We might have websites that aren't entirely clear. Sorry, that's my 5-year old banging on the door. We might have websites that also don't make a lot of sense. And our thought leadership might sound a little bit like we just took whatever it is that we do, dropped it into the chat GPT, and then published it on LinkedIn without making any changes whatsoever. But the most interesting thing to me was that when I would go to these, as a reminder, very successful entrepreneurs, and I would say to them, why are you special? Why is it that people buy from you and not from your competition? What is it that's driving your strategy and the returns that you have now? Very often, the response that I would get would be, I don't know, man. Stop asking me these questions. Just leave me alone. We're just better. We're just more detail oriented. We focus on it, and people just love us for who we are, which brought about a bit of a revelation for me, which is the fundamental problem that's happening with these bad decks is really lying at this intersection of two things. One of them is articulating our differentiation. This is what we do that's different than our competition or different than the status quo, which is what makes us so special. And the other part of this is turning it into a story, which, for the sake of simplicity, is just getting your audience to care. And when those two things are not in alignment, we have trouble. So if you have something that's really differentiated, but you tell it in the most boring way and you just drop in a bunch of stats about it, people are going to be like, cool, and then walk away. Or if you tell a really great story that gets somebody brought in, but you can't really articulate why you're special, you might have a lot of hype, but then you might have drop off before somebody buys. So we need to make sure that we are hitting our audience at the intersection of those two things. So fundamentally, today we're going to talk about foundation. I have a workshop that basically walks us through how to do all of this, and you walk away with a really strong deck, outline, narrative, and understanding of what your story should be. And we also work with entrepreneurs and just building your stupid decks in the first place. Today, though, I'm going to go through a couple of things. I'm going to share with us the 4 sections that I believe need to be in every single deck, whether you're fundraising, selling, whatever else it might be. I'm going to share with you 4 categories of storytelling mistakes that many of us are making today, which is the reason people read our decks and are completely lost. I'm going to share with you something that broke my brain when I figured it out that will hopefully break your brains as well. And you'll be like, oh my God, I'm going to do this forever and it's going to change my life. And for anybody that's like, no, Michael, I refuse to learn more than one single thing in any given session. I have one singular thing that you can do to your deck to make it instantly better and more exciting for an investor to read off the bat. So, before we go through all that, we should probably start at the beginning. What's the objective of a deck? Why do we have this in the first place? And by the way, if you have a very cynical answer to this, share it because there's a decent chance that I might agree with you. But I'd love to hear what's the objective of a deck? P.S. This is not a rhetorical question. I am perfectly happy spending the next hour and a half sipping this cup of tea at you.
Anyone?
To sell something, an idea, great. To reach investors, absolutely. To present a business opportunity. These are great answers. I have a problem with them. To tell a story about your business. And my problem with these answers aren't that they're wrong, but it's that when we keep getting all of these pieces of feedback from all of these different people, it's hard to understand what bucket of them is worth listening to versus what bucket of them is not worth listening to. So I've put some time and effort into trying to articulate what are some measurable or as measurable as possible KPIs that we can use when assessing whether a deck is doing the job it's supposed to do. So, first and foremost, the objective of a deck in my mind is to get the meeting with the investor or with the client. You don't sell somebody with a deck, you get somebody excited enough to want to speak with you. So, my first layer of KPIs is anybody that reads your deck should know enough about what you do to be able to self select if they want to speak with you, or alternatively, to be able to self select that you're not the right fit for them. Now, a layer deeper is I want anybody that reads your deck to be able to ask you thoughtful and substantive questions specific to what it is that they're interested in. The inverse of this is a little bit easier to explain, and that is basically anytime somebody looks at you and you're like, yeah, I read your deck, I get kind of a gist, but like, I don't know, can you just start over and explain to me what you're doing because I'm still a little bit lost? And then finally, my North Star is I want anybody that reads your deck to be able to walk up to a stranger 1 week later and say, this is what this company does and this is why they're special. And in a perfect world, I want 10 people that have read your deck to repeat back the exact same thing. In other words, I want your deck to be unambiguous in its interpretation and memorable. And in order to do that, we need to give our investors information and story. Contrary to what most of us have been taught about how we actually absorb information from the Socratic method, where give me the information and I am cool and collected and I will sit in my cool and collected space and I will assess whether or not this makes sense and whether or not I want to move forward. Like all of those investors that are like, just tell me what you do, give me the deck, and I can assess the returniness and the riskiness of this and spit it off your rate for me. It's not actually how our brains work at all. We are hardwired for story and we respond to story so much more than information for two specific reasons. Number one is that 80% of a decision to do something comes from an emotionally driven place. Interestingly enough, and all of you, because you live in the world of food and CPG, probably already know this, but 80% of a decision to buy something also often comes from a trusted source. Um, but we are beings that think that very often we are assessing the data and coming to the right conclusion. But what's actually happening is that we get excited about something. We decide we want to do it from this emotional space. And then we use the facts to justify the decision that we've already made. And there's a fancy term for this called the confirmation bias, which I'll share with you all right now. About a year ago, we bought a new car. And when anybody asks me, Mike, why'd you buy that car? I'm like, oh, great question. I love talking about this car. I'm like, it's a 7-seater and we've got a big family, so we need to have a 7-seater. It's stupidly environmentally friendly, and that's important to us. It's got an insanely high safety rating, so that was really important for us. It was the color blue, and blue's cool, right? And we got a discount on it. And people are like, oh, yeah, smart, 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 cool, cool, cool. But if you ask my wife, why did you guys get that car? She'll be like, Michael was obsessed with this thing. He wouldn't shut the fuck up about it. I actually showed him like 10 other cars and he just shut me down and was like, this is the car that we have to buy. Because I had emotionally connected with this. I was excited about it. And then I used all of those facts to justify the decision that I had made. Story is how we create that evocative component and how we bring somebody out. Information does not do that. Now, the other reason that story is so important, it is how evolutionarily we have grown to remember information. Story is memorable. Case in point, to all of my listeners dialing in right now, who here has heard of the Bible? Anyone? Any takers? Excellent. Now, without using internet, who here can give me the 10 commandments? I got to tell you, most of the time I always get at least two of the seven deadly sins when I ask this question. But who wants to go off mute and try their hand at naming the 10 commandments or just drop them into the chat? What have we got? There's always one person too that like studied Bible. Or like technically there's 400 some commandments. Do not kill, do not steal. Yeah, we got the fun ones so far. Neighbor's wife. Yeah, we're getting all the fun ones. Adultery. Yeah. Adultery. Mm-hmm. No other, yeah, false idols, no gods. Don't read? Anew. There's got to be more to it than that. Thou shall not become literate.
I think Anu was saying he never read
Oh,
it.
I like my interpretation more. Thou shalt honor. Yep, yep, yep. What are we at? Four? All right, how about this? Who here could tell me the story of how we got the Ten Commandments? Just the general gist, the Cliff's Notes. Why did we get them? What's the purpose of them? How did we get them?
My boy Moses went up on the mountain and came back with the first set, smashed those when he saw the golden calf, went back, refined it. I guess that was the first revision, if you will, and came back with 10, which were designed to act as a um, guiding ideals for at the time the Jewish people.
Yeah. If I were to oversimplify that, God was like, stop being an asshole. Here's a bunch of rules to follow. Now, the reason I bring this up is because here's a book that many of us, or a story that many of us have heard, and a list that many of us have encountered. And if we're asked to remember the list, kind of fades from our brains. But hopefully, even if you're like, there's no way I am volunteering to answer this because I know that there's a trick question somewhere in here, you're generally right, not for this question, but most of you at least hopefully had this pop into your brains and be like, oh yeah, no, something about tablets and dropping them and don't be an asshole and follow these rules and all of that, which is my heavy-handed way of illustrating this idea that it's very easy for us to remember stories and it's much harder for us to retain specific pieces of information. So, with that in mind, I am of the belief that there are four fundamental sections that need to go in every deck. And as you see here, I've highlighted 3 out of 4 of them, the color orange, which is my way of saying these are story sections. And that businessy stuff part actually could be appendix or can be embedded in your deck itself. But I believe that we need to make almost all of our deck into a story and kind of turning it away from facts. Let's go a little bit deeper into what each of these sections actually is. So, first is the market gap. This is the actual story of your business and the market arbitrage. This is, what does the market look like today? What's the missing gap? What has nobody done so far? Why has nobody fixed it? What's the market opportunity? If we're selling a premium product that might not be a pain felt, but it's an opportunity or alternative of what people are spending for the same thing, this is who I am, my background, why I built this, what I've built, and where I'm going. And it could look something like this. And I'll ask all of you, if you can, give me a thumbs up or wave at me or jump in the chat when you've read this slide, and then I can move to the next slide. This is also my subtle hint of being like, everybody come off video, come party with me. Wait, go on video. Oops. So I like to think that when this story is told well, your audience's natural response, especially if they're an investor, is going to be like, seriously, this is still a problem today. Nobody's fixed it. This is really an opportunity that nobody has addressed. And it's your job and fiduciary responsibility to say, no, don't take my word for it. Look at my team's qualifications and my background. Look at what we've already built. Look at the number of clients that we've already sold to. Look at the partnerships that we have. Look at these strategic investors that have already gotten involved. Don't take my word for it. Look at what we've done. I'm a huge fan of superlative slides. And the reason I love these is because our investors have got some form of ADD all the time. They're flipping through a ton of decks on a regular basis, and we just need to punch them in the face with it. So you can pick whatever those might look like depending on what stage you're at. But if you can drop something like this in, and then you can have additional slides about testimonials and reviews and images, but something like this immediately lets me see where you are and how real and credible you are. This is a bio slide. There are many like it. Now is when we hit a lot of the businessy stuff. So this is all of the items that I'm going to argue are confirmation bias. These are not the things that get an investor excited because it's the data about your company. But once they're already excited, they will point to this and be like, this is why I love this company. So this either goes embedded in the middle of the story or in your appendix. And it's ultimately 50% educating and 50% flexing and showing off what you've got. So you might have more details about new products. This is where the inevitable market slides go and your go to market and your business model. The competitive landscape, the competitive advantage, that's like all the check boxes where, oh my gosh, I'm the only one with all the green. And maybe additional parts about your team could go here. So this slide, the whole reason that I had this slide was to flex that they already have manufacturing set up in China and that they have great margins. And the rest of it is just to be pretty and beautiful and get the investor excited. This is a breakdown of the different types of demographics because they were selling to wholesalers and partners and white labeling. We made individual slides that basically said, here's the different categories. Here's how big this market is, and here's how many we're already selling to. Now, eventually, we either kind of come back to story mode or we've skipped the businessy stuff and we've jumped right to it. And this is where we might say, here's our historic projections. This is what we're on track to do. We're now raising this much money, which allows us to hit the following milestones. And if you are looking for liquidity as an investor, which you probably are, this is what an exit could look like. I do want to bring everybody's eye to something very specific on this slide. Many of us include the information in that chart on the bottom left, which is I am a responsible steward of your money. I am going to take this $2 million and spend it in the following way. Now, I'll ask everybody here, having flipped through this deck, can any of you tell me if 45% is the right amount of money to be using out of 2 million on inventory, or whether or not 20% is the right amount for marketing? How are you supposed to know? You know nothing about this company. What is important though is if I'm like, well, you've sold 66,000 so far, I can begin doing the mental math about where you're going and where my money's going to get you. So, for the sake of that first push of excitement, I want to err more on everything that's on the right. What are the milestones and the KPIs you're setting for yourself that you will accomplish with this money? Ideally focused in revenue and growth. Everything on the left side, it isn't bad, but I can't know if that's right until I get to know you better, which is something that happens after the deck conversation, not before. So, There are a few different ways that we can be incorporating story into our deck. I'll walk you through kind of my overarching theme in just a few minutes, but there are four categories of storytelling mistakes that most of us make at some point. That is the reason that an investor looks at your deck and is like, I can't do this anymore, and just moves on. Now, my company is called Hate Your Deck, and I'm going to ask all of you to embrace the hatred with me and go on a little hatred journey and tell me when you look at other decks and you're like, this is so bad, stop doing this. I hate this deck and I kind of hate you now. What are the things that you see in other decks that drive you crazy? Too much text, tons of words. Yeah. Strong agree. Come on, you can't all be that happy. Yeah, the market, it's $1 trillion and all we need is 1% of 1%. Silly animations. I'll go a step further and say I don't like video or any animation in my deck. I want to read this as a PDF.
When you get to the end and you know less than at the beginning.
Yeah, you're like, I would have been better off just going to your website. Too many slides. Okay, these are all great. And I'm going to walk you through one for pitch and one for an investor to read. Brett, I'll talk about this in just a little bit. So save that thought. Um, so I'm going to share with you kind of all of these I agree with. And I've tried to think about them in terms of categories. So instead of nitpicking something specific, we can draw ourselves to say this falls into this category of mistake, and now we can have a better idea on how we might fix it. So the first category of mistake is the curse of knowledge. This is the implicit assumption that your audience knows anything about the space in which you operate. And some of you might be like, yeah, but a lot of the investors I'm going in front of are niche. Like they're familiar with this. My answer is like, yes, but those investors might have associates that are less familiar with it. Or they might have people they like to co-invest with that are less familiar with the space, but might be excited about you. And we just want to get them up to speed a little bit more. So, an example of the curse of knowledge falls in this slide. And I should just call out quickly this is a brilliant company, very successful. They just made the mistake of building a bad deck and were kind enough to let me use it when I present to a bunch of strangers. But when we look at this, can any of us have any idea what in the world does this company do? Any insights around like what is the problem that exists that they're going after? And some of you might be like, Mike, I'll bet there were other slides that gave us context. There weren't. This was it. Any guesses? What's the problem that exists in this market? Yeah. A very common answer that I get is something with glaucoma. And the answer is like, that makes a ton of sense. And you're super wrong. No fault of yours, but that's not what they're doing. So, effectively, in the world of drug development and drug testing, when you need to go and put your drug, when you want to develop a drug, you eventually hit a point where you want to put it into humans. And to do that, you need to get FDA approval. Before you go through FDA testing, give me one quick moment, please. My son is screaming.
This is a great opportunity to remind everyone that the recording and the slides of all of our webinars are available for Vegpreneur members. If you're not a member yet, I definitely recommend joining. We got a few here on the call. What's up, Brett? We got Marie, who I work with. I saw Madeline, what's up? Julian was here. There he is. So you can access all of our recordings and slides after and watch it at your own leisure. I'll drop a link in the chat at the end, or you can go to our website and click join.
Thanks
Back
for
to
clearing this
Mike.
up, Noah.
Sorry about that, everybody. FDA testing, when you actually test something on humans. Before you do that, there are three ways to test your drugs. One of them is in 2D cell cultures. The problem with that is in the name. Cell cultures are 2 dimensions and humans are 3 dimensions. You can test your drugs in animals, which the ethical component of this notwithstanding, the problem is that animals and humans are different. So the drug results that you get are not always the same. Or you can take the organ out of a cadaver, which is actually the perfect way to test the drug before you can put it in front of live humans. Except getting your hands on cadavers is just difficult and expensive, which leads in a downstream way to a lot of drugs failing or needing a lot of heavy adjustments when they hit FDA testing, which is really expensive and inefficient. So what this company did is they found a way to take the cells out of organs of cadavers and then replicate these like scaffolds thousands of times so that instead of having one drug test per cadaver, you could have lots of them. And they began this in the world of glaucoma testing, and we're then moving on to something else. Again, I'm going through all of this because there's a real story to it, but this slide assumes way too much knowledge before you even get into it. Now, my second category of mistake is the false consensus effect. This is a fancy way of saying ambiguous language. This is any time that somebody says a buzzword that might be interpreted in different ways or gives a stat that also could be interpreted in different ways. An example of this occurred about 2 months ago for me. I was working with a venture fund building their deck, and they invest effectively in founders that have product market fit. And we were 45 minutes into the call, and I said, actually, quick timeout. How do you define product market fit? And there were three partners on the call, and every single one defined it differently, which is really dangerous when everybody can't agree on what it is. Same word, different interpretation. And then every single other person that's applying for this fund is going to have a different interpretation as well. This is another, I think, perfect example of both curse of knowledge and false consensus, because most of us might interpret this as something about glaucoma or anything else. So if we have different people read this and walk away with a variety of different interpretations, that's really dangerous because you want your investor to only take away, excuse me, exactly what it is that you want them to walk away with. So, my next mistake, it's a blend of two things. It's bad bragging and trust me statements. So despite the fact that I'm the story guy and I'm like, everybody needs to have a story in your deck and it's really important. That's what drives decisions for sales and fundraising and everything else. It's true, but there's one thing you can do that's even more important, which is bragging about your success. As an investor, I want to invest in people that aren't losers or people that are, dare I say, successful. And you might be surprised at the amount of times I'll go through an entire deck and I'll be like, I have no idea if you're an idea on a piece of paper or if you're making millions of dollars in revenue. And that's really bad because if and when you're doing well, then you're leaving a lot of opportunity on the table to get me hyped up and excited about you. And the same lies with your bio. I want to invest in people that have been successful in the past and not losers. But if all I see is just a little headshot of you, then I don't know if you're smart or not. Now, the other problem that I come across is trust me statements. And this is any time where you say, I'm bigger, better, faster, stronger, cutting edge, best in class, blah, blah, blah. And I read it and I believe that you believe it, but you haven't actually convinced me of any of this information. And I never see better examples of this than I do in bio slides. So if you look at this, internationally recognized prior scale up and M&A experience. In this particular case, it was 100% true. But I've now met two different teams that have told me I have an exit. And when I say, cool, what is your exit? They go, I had a lawn care business in high school that I sold to my family member when I graduated. And it's like, letter of law, that is an exit, but you have now ruined that term for every other entrepreneur that I meet. So this is very much a trust me statement. But then I also see a headshot, a name, a title. I see how long you've been working and the type of work that you've done. And what I might see in a lot of slides are a bunch of really impressive logos. Now, I want to ask all of you to go through a little exercise with me for just a moment. If you can, close your eyes. Come with me to a Zen place. I'm going to use my yoga voice. So, I want all of you to think on this. Do you have any friends, colleagues, former colleagues, frenemies, family members, associates, people that you've met that have very high pedigree backgrounds? They've gone to those very impressive universities. They've worked at some of the top consulting firms or the top tech firms. And At this point, they might just get hired because of the logos that they have. Can you picture any of those people? Are they sitting fresh in your brain? You know, like you're thinking of those exact folks. Now that you're picturing them, I have a question for you. Have any of you, in your heart of hearts, ever thought to yourself, how in the world did you get into that organization? You are one of the dumbest, most incompetent human beings I've ever met in my entire life. The fact that you got into that university makes me think less about that and possibly society as a whole. There is one program at one university where I have hated almost every single person I've ever met that has gone there. And I am aware of that bias, and I do my best to not walk in with that bias when I meet somebody that has that stamp in their bio slide. But I can tell you that for every one of them that I am aware of, there are so many more where I'm like, oh, I just met somebody that has this pedigree and I kind of didn't like them, or they kind of did this and they kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I might not even be aware of it. So, my recommendation to all of us is that your bio slide should be more braggadocious about the things that you have accomplished, almost like a resume, the things that you've done specifically before you launch this company that have milestones and accomplishments and impressive things. And no, it doesn't mean put your bio into this, but it does mean don't just give me a bunch of logos so that I jump back into that false consensus mode. And I'm like, oh, well, no, I don't like people that went to this school. Therefore, I'm not going to invest. Or I don't like people that worked at this organization. Therefore, I'm not going to invest. Add more about you that is tangible and quantifiable about your successes. And then finally, my last one's a bit of a catch all. It's too many words, too many pictures, code switching, which is this idea of bouncing back and forth between linear thought. Or really, is there anybody here that has ever read or heard of Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow? It's this Nobel Prize winning economist had this boneheadedly simple idea, like in retrospect, that is effectively that humans live in one of two states of mind. We live in fast thinking mode, which is what we spend most of our time doing, where we're walking down the street, having a conversation, talking about whatever, paying attention to the world around us. Or there's slow thinking mode. This is what happens if we're walking and I'm like, hey, what's a 37 times 25? And there's a decent chance that after being asked that question, you will physically stop walking. Your eyes will roll into the back of the head. And if I go, hey, can you see me? Can you see me at all? You won't even notice that I'm there because you're so deeply embedded in thinking about that question that I just asked you. The truth is that our investors spend an overwhelming amount of their time in fast thinking, as evidenced by the fact that they typically take 30 seconds to 2 minutes to read a deck and then move on. The more information we put into the deck, the more we are building it as a slow thinking mode thing, which is really dangerous because our investor will just end up skipping the slide. For instance, this you see this part on the left, which is the future plan. You see how much money they've raised, how much money they're raising, their historic revenue, the number of products. Like, is there anybody who's even following this? Or have your brains just stopped and you're like, this is so bad. My brain refuses to try and connect the dots on this slide, and I cannot do it. I've been using this slide forever, and I still have not fully connected the dots on this. And it's not saying that the founders aren't brilliant, they are, but we just cram too much shit into this, and my brain's like, no, I'm out. So, y'all are like, thanks, Mike. You took a really hard thing and made it even harder. You're welcome. This is the end of my this is the end of my presentation. Good luck with your decks. I'm kidding. That's my obligatory dad joke. I've got a few more questions for us, and then I will introduce to us a new methodology that I recommend that we use when building our decks. So, Brett, to your question, what do you do? Do you email a deck before or after a meeting? Do you pitch your deck in front of a group of people? Or are you like, I don't even use a deck unless I truly have to? I'm a one on one conversation person. But how do y'all present your decks today?
Actually, I haven't. I've been in the middle of redoing my deck and just send a one pager, but after a conversation. If they want it beforehand, I'll send it. But I had been trained how to build a deck, but it was for pitches. And I realized that that's like a dog and pony show, and I'm not a fan. I'd rather talk with the individual, lay down the facts, and see if we might work together.
I agree with that. Except maybe the facts. The facts are good to corroborate your story, but the facts won't get them excited. But I'm being pedantic here. I love the leave behind because it's a little bit one dimensional, but it allows you to turn your fundraise partially into a SaaS process where it can get shared and then shared by other people behind your back without you having to be there. In a perfect world, you don't need to send it to get to get a meeting, but more often than not, your investors like, I'm not going to speak with you unless you send me a deck. So you just send them a deck. On the other end, I love the one-on-one conversation because you can be dynamic. You can have your enthusiasm, your charisma, your passion, your energy. You can read the room and be like, this isn't landing. I'm going to move on. Or if somebody's like, I really want to know more about how you make this, or I really want to understand more about this marketing channel, you can spend more time on that, which is fantastic. The pitch to me is a little bit of the worst of both worlds. We're like, here's a one dimensional story that I have to say in front of a group of people. And if it's not landing and I can see that it's not landing, there's not a lot I can do. I'm just going to kind of stand here and be really uncomfortable. And Brett, to your point, like I'm going to have to just do a dog and pony show. And the winner of this pitch competition or the person that is most successful is the person that's best at presenting, not necessarily the person that's the best company or that has the best company. So the approach that I'm going to walk you through is for a leave behind deck. But the purpose of this is that it can actually be modified unbelievably easily to turn into a pitch deck. But my argument is the least number of decks that you have to build, the better off you are. So this is a bit of a jump, but who here likes Game of Thrones? Anyone? Any takers? Excellent. So, all right, here's my real question. Who are my fellow nerds? Who else has read the books? Anyone? No? Fine, whatever. Let's say that I'm brand new to Game of Thrones. I've never heard of it before. And you're like, Mike, do you live under a rock? And I'm like, I'm a dad and I'm a loser. Like, and you're like, fine, whatever. And I'm like, should I read the books? Should I watch the show? And you're like, yes, absolutely. And I go, well, why? What do you say to me? Why should I get into Game of Thrones? What do you love about it that's so good that you think I should use my time to watch this show? I guess y'all don't like it that much, do you? Come on. Is there anything about Game of Thrones that y'all like? You're like, this is why it's such an amazing show and or book series and or comic book series? The family storylines. Absolutely. Yeah, the bandwagon effect. I can be like, yeah, I watch it. Whatever. I can talk about the characters. Have I scared you all away that much? Or are you just tuned out? Yes. I get it. I get it. It's fine. So I ask this question a lot, and I've got the widest range of answers that you could imagine. I've got people that talk about specific characters. I've got people that talk about the unpredictability of the show or how nothing is sacred and anybody can die. I've got people that call out specific events or specific characters that they love. I've had people that are like, I just like the dragons or the cinematography. I've had two people tell me the nudity was something that they really enjoyed about the show, which is a wild thing to say in front of a group of your peers. I've gotten just anything that you can possibly imagine about this. And the reason that I tell you this is that here we have one series that is universally loved by most people, many people, and many of us are drawn to different things about this, despite the fact that we all like it. Some of us like the intricate details, some of us like the political intrigue, some of us like the characters or the events, or just the way that it's done and the art form behind it. And the same is true of your company. There are going to be some investors that just care about you or care about the distribution that you have today or the influencers. There are some that care about the product and the co-man more than anything else. There are going to be some that are just drawn to all of these different parts of your business. And my argument to you, this is going to seem weird and backwards, but my argument to you is that I actually want you to not put a ton of detail about all of those different things. I want you to give, have you ever heard the saying, give them an, or leave them wanting more? I want you to do that in your deck. I want you to just put enough drops to say, this is what I've got in this area. And if you're an investor that cares about that, come ask me more questions. And I've got a little bit about this, and then come and ask me more questions. Because what happens is when we hear a similar question by a lot of people, or we're like, that's a really good question, that question might not be relevant to other investors. And all of a sudden, when we drop that answer in, two things can happen. Number one is they're like, oh, I don't want to go into fast thinking mode, and they'll just glaze over it and everything else. Or number two is this is an investor that wasn't worried about something that now all of a sudden is because you're acting defensive in the deck that you've built. So my argument is we want to put a superficial amount of detail, enough to get them to understand what you do, but not to get heavy into the devil of the details. Because the purpose of the deck is to get somebody to want to speak with you about it in more detail with you, not to give them everything in that initial outreach. And then finally, what's the right number of slides? What do you do?
Less is more, but go crazy in the appendix.
10 or less, crazy in the appendix,
I like 8 slides personally.
8 slides. All right. And this is going to be the most controversial thing that I say to all of you today. I think. I mean, we'll see. Jury's out. But I think that you should have 20 to 30 slides total, including appendix. Hear me out before you all drop off this call. The reason that investors have been preaching that we need to have less slides goes to this idea that investors do not spend a lot of time reading our decks. So the natural conclusion is have less slides, therefore they will be able to read it faster. But what ends up happening is that we put more fucking shit in every single slide because there's more information that we actually have to tell them. And then our slides look like those slides that I showed you, where I was like, hey, who's read this? And y'all are like, I didn't read this. This is a terrible slide. And I'm like, how about now? And you're like, not reading it, Michael. I told you I'm not reading this slide. It's terrible. So when you think about it, in like the Guy Kawasaki model, which is the problem, the value prop, the underlying magic, the business, the go-to-market strategy, the competitive landscape, the management team, the advisors, the financial projections, all of this, we've hit 10 slides. And if you believe the argument that I'm making, that story is more important than the specific facts, a lot of this information isn't even the thing that gets the investor excited in the first place. And we've already hit our slide limit. Now, the counterpoint is that we live in a world of a very short attention span. I know I've said this like 19 times. The average length of a scene in a commercial is less than 3 seconds. Thought leadership on LinkedIn, it's like sentence, 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 because nobody has the time to read a paragraph anymore. Like we have to break everything out. So my argument is not that we should be adding more information in, but to meet our reader and how they absorb information, we should double the number of slides and put half the amount of information on every slide, or triple the number of slides and put a third of the information on every slide. And if you think back to the deck that I actually started with, that's a 30-slide deck. And when I ask people how many slides do you think it was after they've read it, they go, I don't know, 8, 9, because the measurement that we should be using is how long does it take to read this in completion, not how many slides is it. So if we're building a leave behind deck that has minimal detail and could be 20 to 30 slides long total, including appendix, and it needs to live in fast thinking mode, can any of you think of anything else that follows a similar format to this? Anyone? A video, commercials. This one's actually a trick question, I've learned, because there are a couple of great answers, but there's only one that's living in my brain. So this really should just be like, guess what I'm thinking. But I'll give you all a hint. Is anybody here a parent? Or has anybody here ever been around children or even been a child? All right, what do you got for me? I've laid this hint on pretty heavy.
A kid's book.
Thank you, Noah. A children's book. You should turn your deck into a children's book that has one sentence at the top to make your point and some sort of visual that proves it. Or you skip the visual to make it even punchier. But here's the thing, when you read the top sentence of every slide, it should feel as if you just read your startup's elevator pitch. And this is the magic that I can take 30 seconds to 2 minutes to read those top sentences, or I can spend 15 or 20 minutes reading the deck in more detail if I want to go into everything in your appendix to learn more about what you're doing. But you can balance both of those things with this approach. So in my mind, the children's book fundraising deck, this is the Candyland board. It's what does the world look like today? It's not good or bad. It's just setting the tone. But there's a market opportunity that looks like this, and nobody's fixed it because of this. And there's a nice way and a mean way of saying these things. And here's what, like, why this is meaningful to our users or buyers. What I'm so and so. This is my background and my lived experience, and this is what I've built. Don't take my word for it. By the way, these 4 red boxes, they are not literal every slide. This is the spirit of the flow of what we should be saying. So this is what we've built. This is who we've sold it to. Here's the number of customers and partners and everything else, and maybe even strategic investors that have come on board. At which point you can actually skip everything else, and that would go in the appendix. And then you'd say, we're now raising this much money, which will allow us to hit the following milestones. The end, give me money. Or you can say, hey, here's a little bit more about our product. Here's a little bit more about who our market is and who we're selling to and how we sell to them. Here's a little bit more about the competitive landscape. Here's more about the competitive advantage. And here's a little bit more about the team that we brought on board. Now, I did promise to all of you that for those of you that are like, no, I won't learn more than one thing, I do have one hack. So if you've been waiting for me to give you the hack, come back to me now. I'm about to tell you. Here's the one thing you can be doing to your deck to make it instantly better in front of investors. I've already called out that our investors have ADD and that they need you to put yourself on the pedestal to make yourself impressive. I cannot tell you the amount of decks that I go through where I'm like, are you an idea on a piece of paper? Are you in revenue? What are you doing? Oh, wait, nope, I'm done the deck. I didn't see the answer, and I actually wasn't paying attention to anything that you told me because I was looking for the answer to how credible of a company you are before I began taking this seriously, which is really bad for you because you want people to pay attention to you. So my recommendation is that the first slide that everybody has should be an overview slide where you have 1 or 2 sentences that are a literal description of what you do, and then cherry pick a couple of brags about your accomplishments or about you right in the very front. So I immediately put you on the pedestal. It could look like this. You read this slide, and you're like, okay, I know what this company does. I know that they're in revenue. I know that they're growing. I know that they have very loyal customers. And I know that I want to take a little bit more time to understand what it is they've done and how they've done it and how they figured it out. So, we have completed the Michael talking at you part of this workshop. I will jump off mute, open this up for some questions, but I figure we could spend the next hour if anybody is not terrified of doing so and you want to share your decks. We can go through and look at it from the angle that I recommend, which is looking for any of the storytelling mistakes, trying to ascertain realistically, are you hitting those goals that I think are the KPIs that we should be following? Do I know what you do? Can I ask you thoughtful questions specific to what I'm interested in? And could I tell a stranger what you do a week later without kind of any drag or loss in remembering or understanding what it is that you do? And if the answer to that is you hit all 3, then stop making any changes to your deck. And anytime you get advice, tell them nicely or not so nicely to go away. Yeah, so why don't I do something rare and stop talking for a minute and open this up for any questions, comments, concerns, emotional outbursts. And then if anybody wants to share their deck, jump on in.
That was great, Mike. Thank you so much.